Okay, I think we'll get started here. We're going to start out with some jumping jacks to get warmed up. My name is Dean Steele. I'm an associate professor in agricultural engineering at NDSU in Fargo, so I've been asked to moderate the session today, so I want to welcome you all here. I want to thank the Water Users Association and the North Dakota Irrigation Association, and also thank you for coming to the session today. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation this morning, and we'll continue now with the irrigation workshop. So if you just heard, the Irrigation Association has been working with NDSU on an irrigation sustainability analysis, and hopefully that presentation was informative. As a follow-up, we wanted to have Zhulu and Rob join us for this workshop to give feedback, to get feedback from you. So they mentioned that they wanted feedback, and so this is an opportunity for you to give feedback on that. So I'd like to invite Zhulu and Rob up here. And I think if you want to stay at the table, that'd be fine. There's microphones at the table here you can use, or if you want to stand and walk around or just go out into the audience, what's your flexibility for that, okay?
I need to take notes, but first I need to carry my microphone.
Okay, all right. Let's welcome Zhulu and Rob.
Well, thank you guys being here. I'll probably will do both. I mean, I'll probably walk around and also sit here to take notes. First of all, do you guys have questions for Rob and myself?
Okay, we're going to split the microphone duties. If someone has a question, we'll put it on the microphone so everybody can hear, and then they'll share the microphone there. So I can give this to anybody that's got a question.
We've seen all of the acres and everything that you presented before. One of the things that we did back in the mid-70s was that we had somebody developed, what the economics of irrigation was. And back in the 70s, they said if we converted an acre of dry land, especially in western North Dakota, to irrigated, that it had increased the economic activity in North Dakota by about $1,000 an acre. That wasn't the total gross production, but by the time that money turned over and over, and after we heard that, there's some of us talking, we need to put some dollars and figures on what this economic development would be with increased irrigation. Do you have any idea where we can go to start digging up some of that information?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. As I mentioned, so this project right now is only like very short period. We only have 9 months to get a result from this. Financial or economic analysis is not a part of this project. Yeah, I think when we'll go deeper, further investigation, that should be. So 70s, that is study on the Ammons County region.
We were from Kidder County, and they said in Kidder County, if an acre of irrigation development created that much economic activity, and I haven't seen nowadays the figures would be much different.
Sure.
But,
the Tom is here with us. I do hope he can come over here. So yeah, you can go.
Yeah, I can maybe add a little bit too. I think that what we're hoping is that the study, once it's completed, can be a good baseline for what might technically be possible, and then it could be built on by others to start putting numbers to what would be economically feasible, or what would some of the, if we have a few different scenarios, what might those economics look like. I know that there are folks at NDSU and in the extension agricultural or economics and maybe even just in the Department of Agricultural and Applied Economics who've done that type of work in the past. And I'm guessing there's folks who would be interested in perhaps doing that type of work. And in some of the initial discussions we had with the Irrigation Association, when they came to us with the request to do this study, I mean, I think we all had in the back of our minds that that would be a logical next step if it could all kind of come together that way. So hopefully the work we're doing can serve as a foundation for others to build on and to start look at some of those economic numbers, because we know it's important. We just outside the scope of what we're able to accomplish and what our expertise is.
So to follow up with that too, we have not only the economic impact, but also the economic impact of not having irrigation. Okay, that's a little bit different. There's a company in South Dakota that is doing these type of studies right now. I think it's a natural fit to go with NDSU, but Danny and I have talked about that, and we're going to get the talks going with that. And possibly, I think just for the state of, for Nebraska, the study I looked at this morning was like, and granted, a lot more irrigation in Nebraska, but $12 billion they were leaving on the table by not being able to have the irrigation that they need. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but the other thing that we want to look at is drain tile. What drain tile with irrigation can do, because it's a huge thing when you can control that water on and off and get that into an economic impact. I think Cavendish has asked for it. You know, they've said they will increase their capacity if they know they have guaranteed water for irrigation.
Warren, I would add your economic question. The newer study we have about the impact of irrigation would be what they did along the McCluskey Canal a couple years ago. Dave Sikowski and the people in Ag Econ. And I think that was published. It was published. I'm not exactly sure where to find it right now, but that would be the newest study about the impact of irrigation development along the McCluskey Canal and what it can mean for the area. So that would be a good starting point to look at it. Now, you know, what Steve said about if you don't put in irrigation, I don't know if they included that in the study. It was just what would be the economic impact of developing more irrigation along the McCluskey. So that's the best I can do for you.
It would be very similar to other areas in McCluskey in the central North Dakota.
Yeah, it'd be very similar to your Kittacon area and some of the other ones as to what a mix of different crops that they looked at and what would be the impact. So.
So in your study, one of the slides I saw yesterday was the not being irrigable because of wetlands. Can you define that? What you labeled as wetlands? Was it just saturated soil? What was that?
Wetlands, so there are layers in the North Dakota GIS hub. I think it's National Wetland Inventory map. So they have the coverage of wetland. So I assume in those wetland that we should have been farmed. So kind of like take that, subtract that from the soil irrigability map.
Okay, so standing water, easement land, I think that was in a separate line item. And then, if I remember the slide right, and then you had wetlands down below, and that, I was just wondering if that was just wet soil, or if it was easement land, if it was actual game and fish wetlands, or what that was.
I think so. I think the definition is like provided by federal government. Is a national wetland inventory.
Okay. All right.
That's what the best I can do.
Okay,
So,
that explains it for me then. Thanks.
Who's next?
Hi, I had a question on the criteria you used for the unsuitable land. When it comes to like trees, tree rows, how is that taken into account? Obviously, those are easily removed, and in a lot of cases, preferred removed.
Yeah, I think.
Sure. So, unsuitable land, yes, it was primarily obstacles that were in the way that we would, if there are suitable obstacles or significant obstacles, that we would eliminate those. Tree rows weren't something that were included in our analysis. It was really streams, rivers and streams, highways, electrical transmission lines, structures, building structures. So those are really the things that we were focused on. And you have to make certain assumptions when you're doing these kind of really broad area geographic analyses. So for example, we'd had some discussions within the group, and I would even have to go back in our notes to even give you more details if you really wanted me to get into the weeds. But even when it came to structures, where we have discussions about, well, should the structure have to be of a certain size? And if it's smaller than that, then we say, no, it's fine. I think we eventually settled on just saying if there was a structure to just not include that parcel, because oftentimes structures have a lot of things that surround them, like tree rows or lawns or other things. So that was like pretty much the only discussion I can recall where tree rows came into it, where we thought they might be associated with structures, but them by themselves is not something that we accounted for.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to add, so for structures, we download that layer from FEMA. So FEMA has a structure for entire state and have a footprint like 450 square feet. So we have that structure in that 40 acres, and we just simply take that out. Yeah. Because considering, or maybe there's trees surrounding the structure.
Anyone else?
So while waiting for your question, so we also we did not consider and only discovered recently is, if any land, like 40 acres, have one wind turbines inside. So as for now, we did not take that into account. I mean, in the future, probably go back, we need to, I found there's a layer there too, so we can just subtract that. If that is a kind of big turbine in that 40 acres, we subtract that.
So your map is really irrigation suitability map, but I understand even though you will probably have a different levels of irrigation, some are well suited, some are maybe moderate. So I assume that with just mentioned that if drainage is in place, that some of the moderate suitable irrigation land can be improved over time. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually in our presentation, I did not discuss. So we have we have one category of irrigable soil, right? And then we got three subcategories of conditional soils. And so one is due to slow permeability, that's in kind of middle North Dakota. And then Southwest is more due to restricted layers. And then mostly in the eastern North Dakota and primarily in the valleys, we have conditional soil due to poor drainage, high water table, and salinity. And when we do this, the third stage, we actually take the conditional soil due to poor drainage, high water table, and salinity out. We did not include that because that will require like high drainage, will require other infrastructures. And if we add that inside the analysis, and maybe we'll increase the numbers, the acreage a little bit more. The reason we did that is because we are kind of, I would say, That's true. Okay, so we stand on the shoulders of a giant, and we are new to this area, and so we look at the past studies, and that's quite a few past studies have done. Very high quality past studies has already been done for North Dakota, and so the State Water Commission did 1995. They did the study for 18 counties in central North Dakota, and so we took the method out from their playbook. One is they did not include the conditional soil due to poor drainage, due to high water table, and also high salinity. So that's the one reason. Second reason is that if you see Rob's presentation, so when we set up the permissive scenario and the restrictive scenarios, right? Two scenarios. Basically, the difference, 2.5 million acres, that's kind of like reclassified from permissive scenario to as a conditional soil and to the non-irrigable soils in the restrictive scenarios. So those are basically the conditional soil due to poor drainage and high water table and salinity.
Yeah, and I won't speak too long. I don't leave a little time for questions if they're out there. But I think one of the things that's going to be challenging with this type of a study is that it's done at a regional scale, right? And you got to find a way to take that regional information and make it so you can take action at a local level. And it's going to take some thoughtfulness when someone's in the process of doing that, because it can give the impression that it's a lot more locally precise than it is. So for example, this all rests on a foundation of this irrigable soils layer, which is based on the soil survey. And I could go in the soil survey and zoom into somebody's field and pretend that I know what the soils are like inside that field, but the soil survey was never really intended to capture that subfield variability, right? So it kind of approximates what is in that field, but through management practices, whether that's drainage or whether that's tillage practices or crop selection, that could really make a big difference on whether or not a particular field that shows up as, let's say, conditionally irrigable, whether or not a farmer could have great success in irrigating it. And there's just really no way for us to capture that in an analysis like this, because the data sets just aren't intended to get at that fine local level of detail. So one of the things that is planned or is proposing is to kind of extend this forward and develop a dashboard that can be an output of this product that could allow folks to maybe take a little bit closer look at specific geographies and maybe kind of turn the dials and some of the assumptions a little bit, as hopefully a tool to make this, the end work that we end up with, to be a little bit more actionable for people to try to put it into local action. But the challenge for us is going to be to make sure we communicate effectively that, you know, this analysis, it can never take the place of the work that has to be done locally when people make decisions on irrigation, right? Hopefully it can just be a springboard, though, as a starting point for people to have those discussions.
I realize this may be hard to do, but when you did the irrigation availability, did you look at the availability of power, three-phase power? Because that's kind of a limiting factor right now. It costs so much money to run power.
I think you nailed it. So originally, and Danny and Steve, when we come down to NDSU, and they're really interested in availability of three-phase power. So that's, I think, it's the best way for water pumping. We asked the Josh Kramer and from rural, I don't know the entire name, the North Dakota Association of Rural Electrical Co-ops, right? And so we sent a request of data where there three-phase power lines are. We only get feedbacks from three. I got responses from different companies, but due to privacy issues and other issues, only 3 companies, co-ops, provide their data that we requested. And we did have some preliminary runs. What we did is we put a 1-mile buffer from their 3-phase power lines, and then overlaid that with the soils map. Only like in I think it's Capital, right? Capital Co-ops. We have some overlays of their region. That's like Burley County and around the county and Emmons County, I think those counties, we probably have like 70,000 acres that is kind of like can be used for irrigation. That's all we did so far, but we do not have the rest of the state, the data from the rest of the state.
Okay, maybe have time for one or two more questions depending on time here. We got a little bit late start, so maybe we can go over just a little bit.
Just to preface that, when Danny and I went to Rob and Zhulu for that, we tried to get that power. We wanted to have it on the 3 criteria: water availability, power, and soils. And the other challenge we had is these guys have only had 9 months to get this done. We wanted it done for the session so that, and county by county, so that the legislators, well, I see what you can do for that county, but what can we do for my county that I represent, or counties? And so we were behind the gun from the get-go, but we wanted to get as much stuff done as possible, and credit to these guys for getting it put together in this short amount of time. The other thing is, I think it's important, the dashboard that Rob brought up, that's to keep this going, so we don't have to go back to studies and reinvent the wheel. Let's keep moving with it as things change, as we define more things. I think that would be the hope of this whole study, that we just keep it going. I think that would make more sense than trying to do this every so many years.
I think it's a very important question for us to ask you guys. I already asked some of individually. So we use the 40 acres, right, quarter section of our base calculation units. So for the center pivot, normally you occupy a quarter section, like 160 acres lands, right? We have, once we did all that analysis, we have some isolated 40 acres lands over there. Should we like remove those isolated lands or just keep that in our analysis?
So does that mean, like, should we put up a 40-acre pivot, or should we go to the full size? I think maybe that's the question. That producer feedback would be helpful. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'll speak to that. I think it should be on the quarter section, or the 130-ish acres that a center pivot covers. Anybody else has got an opinion?
So we should keep or not keeping like the small lands?
No, I don't think so. I don't think you need to.
Would you just keep it over there? Okay,
Yep,
cool.
I'd keep it up by the quarter.
Okay, cool. Then another question is like 2 miles buffer from the aquifer. Will that be too little or again too much? Do you think?
I think it's fair until we know more information. I think 2 miles from the aquifer, I think is fine.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
The other thing that got brought up at our meeting, just to, when Rob and Zhulu presented this yesterday to us, and I think I don't know if Scott's here, Mund, but he brought up a very good point. He said, we can do all these studies, but if we don't get permits, it doesn't matter. And I think that's, we've heard that pretty resounding. I know the DWR is working hard to address this, and they're making progress, but it takes a while to get a permit.
Okay, with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Let's thank Zhulu and Rob again. All right, so next up, we've got a Department of Water Resources update. So Andrew Nygren is going to be giving us an update on what's going on there with regard to irrigation. He's been the director of the Water Appropriation Division for the DWR for approximately 9 months and has worked with the Water Appropriation Division since 2006. Oh. I'm blinded by the light up here, so you can come up and give your presentation.
See if this works. Can you guys hear me all right? There it is. Okay. So as mentioned, I'm the new, relatively new Director of Water Appropriation Division, and I'm just here to give a little update on the division activities over the past year. In case you haven't seen presentations in the past, Water Appropriation Division basically administers and enforces water laws and rules and policies. It also aids to protect the rights of prior appropriators. Our governing statutes are found in North Dakota Century Code 6104, and then in Rule under 8903. The division organizational chart, if you would have been to a presentation on this last year, this would have looked fairly different. The IT department is no longer housed underneath the Water Appropriation Division, and then we did add another section, and I'll go through these briefly. So we have the subsurface exploration section. That's basically in charge of our test hole drilling programs, so all the observation wells that we install, and then the additional test hole drilling that we do throughout the state. During the field season, we have a surface water section involved with the surface water appropriation and the management of the surface water permits we have. A new section that we have here is the groundwater section managed by Jay Yang. He's out of our Fargo office. His primary focus is to be groundwater modeling, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later in the presentation. And then we have a groundwater management section that is managed by Kimberly Fisher, and then there's 6 hydrologists housed underneath that, and they're charged with the management of the groundwater permits that we have in the area, or in the state. A new section that we sort of separated out is the water permit administration section, and the primary focus of that one was to remove some of the responsibilities that we had for our hydrologist and house it in there. So the surface water and groundwater sections that we have could primarily focus on review of permit applications that we have. So what the water permit administration section primarily deals with is the application process itself prior to a permit becoming, or an application coming up to review. And then after a permit's issued, they're involved with the inspection and perfection process, and if a permit is not put to beneficial use, they'd also be involved with the cancellation process. So some of our division responsibilities: identify the availability and quality of the state's water resources, primarily done through our subsurface test hole drilling program, the administration of water permit applications by our other sections, and then the groundwater and surface water section, primarily involved with providing recommendations to the director on issuance of permits. We also maintain our permanent water permit record of all of our water permits that have been submitted to the state. We have an annual reporting process too that the water permit administration section is additionally involved with. And then on occasion, we do assist municipalities and other public entities in developing solutions to water supply issues. That was primarily done early on through a lot of cooperative agreements done with various municipalities to address their water supply issues. So in 2025, or 2024, we had 2 projects. There was a managed aquifer recharge project, and then additionally there was an airborne electromagnetic survey that was conducted. So the managed aquifer recharge project, basically just to touch on what managed aquifer recharge is, it's taking excess surface water and injecting it or infiltrating it into a aquifer. It has historically been done in the state. Valley City uses an infiltration basin where they'll divert water from the Cheyenne River, discharge it into an abandoned gravel pit, and then they have recovery wells. In the 1960s, Minot used an infiltration basin to inject water into the Minot aquifer, as shown on the image of the right. It was destroyed though during Service River flooding in the 70s. In the 1980s, the Bureau of Reclamation was heavily involved, along with the Water Commission, for a pilot project on recharging the Oaks Aquifer. And then in the 1990s, the Forest River colony developed a couple of infiltration basins, and they basically divert water from the Forest River during the springtime flows, and then they use recovery wells to subsequently irrigate during the season. So this phase 1 that we did was basically an assessment of what is the potential of managing the aquifer recharge through all of our aquifers that we have identified. And the basic objectives were to create a map showing the areas that were susceptible to managed aquifer recharge, and then develop recommendations for potential future MAR projects. And it used a number of considerations that are listed there. And the result was it came up with 5 tiers, basically tier 1 being excellent, so it would be overall effective in the management plan of the aquifer, all the way down to poor, where it would be of little benefit, So tier 1, going a little bit more into that, the hydrogeologic conditions are suitable, and then there's also a potential need for it, meaning we've seen observed declines in the aquifer, or there's increased demand on the aquifer as well. Tier 2, also the hydrogeologic conditions are suitable, and it's a scenario where future appropriations are potentially limited due to the amount of existing appropriation. Tier 3 also have suitable hydrogeologic conditions. However, they're in a scenario of stable water levels, or the water levels are increasing. Tier 4 is one where the conditions are potentially suitable, but there's no existing development in the aquifer. And then tier 5 would be where the conditions are not suitable. And additionally, there's probably no development as well. So this is all presented in a interactive map services that came out of the report, and here's sort of a snapshot of it. It shows the rankings of the aquifers. Dark red in this image shows the ones that are excellent. Yellow shows the ones that are poor, and orange would be somewhere in between. Here's a closer image of it in case the other one was a little bit difficult to see. And what you can do additionally is you can click on any of the aquifers and it'll bring up a window. The window then directs you to the county groundwater study if you wanted to view that, and it'll also present a hydrograph, a cumulative, basically a hydrograph that basically shows the water level trends in the aquifer over the period of record that we have water levels in there, in our system, that is. Additionally, it showed the representative water quality in the system. So you can see this is an average water quality assessment. So blues would be ones with low dissolved solids, reds would be ones with high dissolved solids. And then additionally, you can click on that and it gives you some of the representative sample statistics of the aquifer. So it gives you how many samples we had on record, what's the mean, standard deviation, min, max, and then your quartiles as well. So that sort of summarized what the phase 1 outcomes were. And this is actually up for the December 2024 Water Commission meeting for approval, but the proposal here is to take some of the identified aquifers that we have in from the report and then develop numerical models for these 3 aquifers, and this will be done through a consulting firm that was basically awarded the request for proposal bid. So the first one to be assessed is the Elk Valley Aquifer. Elk Valley Aquifer is a confined aquifer up in Grand Forks County. There is a lot of irrigation. There's also a fair amount of municipal use that's coming out, municipal and rural water use that's coming out of that aquifer. So we want to assess the existing conditions and its resiliency during drought, given the level of appropriation now. It also has almost 50 pending applications that we want addressed through this modeling modeling effort. And then we also want to look at, okay, what can MAR do to increase both drought resiliency potentially and then also increased appropriation. Similarly, Spiritwood, we got similar goals. We want to assess the current use and the approved appropriation. This is also a significant source for rural water and municipal supplies for the northeastern portion of the state. And there also has pending applications that we want addressed as well. And then we also want to look at the suitability of managed aquifer recharge to increase appropriation potentially, or potentially stabilize water levels. They're stable right now, but then use it potentially to increase appropriation as well. Last one to be looked at is the Wahpetonberry Valley. similar goals we want. Wapton-Berry Valley has seen about 40 feet of decline since initial development in the 1970s. And then there's continued questions about, or there's always continued interest in further development in southeastern North Dakota. So we want to look at not only what the effects of the present appropriation is, but then potential additional appropriations, and then how, if we do need additional appropriations, how can MAR be used to increase appropriation in that system. So the deliverables from these that I've already alluded to would be groundwater flow models, and then obviously a modeling report with recommendations. And these groundwater flow models will be provided to our groundwater modeling section. This is the area of the state that Jay is sort of inheriting or taking over. So these will be sort of a baseline for continued management of these aquifers. That's the hope and intent. Additionally, we conducted an airborne electromagnetic survey throughout the summer of 2024. This figure shows the existing ones that we've done in gray, and then the 2 additional projects. One was down the southeastern portion of the state, and then we did one throughout the central Dakota aquifer in Kidder and Stutzman County as well. That is ongoing. We're expecting report and final deliverable data on that. I was told by the end of the month or the beginning of January 2025. So shifting gears now to sort of a water permit summary. This sort of summarizes the permits that we've received based upon the priority date, which is the date that we receive a completed application. It sort of shows that we saw increased submitted applications throughout the 1970s with the growth of center pivot irrigation. And then again in the mid-1990s. We also saw an increase in permit received in the early 2010s, and that was predominantly due to interest in industrial use, predominantly in western North Dakota. That also coincides with the amount of temporary water permit applications that we received. Those are shown as the gray bar graph, and then the cumulative count shows that we saw a significant increase beginning in 2010, and that's continued on to 2024 as well. So looking at these temporary water permit applications, this is what's called a box and whisker plot. And basically what this shows is it's the distribution of permits that we receive each month. And we have record of how many permits we've received each month since January 1st, 2012. What this is trying to highlight is the number of temporary water permit applications that we receive are predominantly from surface water sources. They're predominantly in western North Dakota, and they predominantly occur in January, February, March, and April, tapering off through the latter parts of the year. So our surface water staff receives a huge influx of these temporary applications during the first quarter of the year, essentially. 2024 was our second highest year thus far of temporary applications received. You can see our minimum was in 2014, which was still over 400, and then our highest was back in, our minimum was in 2021, our max was in 2014. We received over 1,000 applications. And you can see that 2024 was well above our mean number of applications that we received. So a broader water permit summary. This goes into summarizing the total number of permits we have on record by use type. Those are the rows, and then the status of them. So the number of applications we have in processing, which is 24. Those are ones that were recently submitted. Canceled is somewhat self-explanatory. Are approved and perfected permits are the ones that have water that or have authorizations on them. The held in abeyance ones are ones that have portions held in abeyance. And then keep in mind too that we have 21 permits that are presently under review as well. As it relates to water use, because that's another component of the water appropriation division does. 2023 consumptive use, most of the water use was for irrigation, with almost 400,000 acre feet reported. And then remainder of the portions associated with municipal use, rural water use, and then industrial use. And it's additionally separated out to include what's labeled water depot, and that's water predominantly provided for hydraulic fracturing. So nearly 10% of it was used for hydraulic fracturing. The state has been collecting water use reports essentially since 1977. So this just shows the total amount of reported acre feet that we've received each year. It's increased over the years. You can see that starting in 2010, there is an increased use in industrial use that's predominantly associated with water used for hydraulic fracturing. And since irrigation isn't necessarily tied to, irrigation is obviously tied to use, but if we have wetter years, there's going to be less use. If we have drier years, there's going to be increased use. So this is another metric of presenting the actual reported irrigable acres. So you can see our reported irrigable acres has increased from around 100,000 acres in 1977 reported to over 300,000 acres reported in 2023. Another component that we mentioned for water use is our temporary water permits. The predominant use for our temporary water permits is industrial water depot use, followed by irrigation, and then construction, and then industrial, which would be usually for aggregate washing or some other industrial use. So, summary for 2024 permits, and this data was collected, or I prepared this on November 27th, so I do have some updates to this. So we had 57 applications that have been received in 2024. Half of those, as you kind of saw, were in the application process. The other half did complete the application process and then are pending review. We have 34 permits that were issued. Piggybacking on this, so those are ones that had an issue date of November 27th, 2024, or earlier. And looking at this again, I just looked at it this morning. There's actually 40 that have now been issued. There's 10 that are to be signed. And then there are 10 that are presently in a 30-day comment period where recommendations have been made to approve them. So that totals then approximately 60 permits then that are going to be issued by the end of 2024 or early 2025. I don't know if everyone's aware, we made statutory changes to make canceling permits a little bit more streamlined, and this year we were able to cancel 76 permits that were no longer putting water to beneficial use. There is additional, if I recall, 19 or so that are in the process of being canceled, and then there's another 15 that we're going to proceed with the cancellation process. So there's essentially 113 permits then that have been canceled or we're proceeding with cancellation on those permits. And additionally, another portion of this is inspecting and verifying conditionally approved permits and then issuing perfected permits. And we were able to issue 34 perfected permits this year, and that number will increase a little bit as well before the end of the year. Another thing that's not up here is that those perfected permits require an inspection, and we were able to inspect 48 permits this year. And then finally, 662 temporary water permits were issued. So there's also a fair amount of monitoring that the Water Appropriation Division does in cooperation with our technicians that are housed in our administration section. There's 4,000 wells that are measured. Our subsurface exploration section drilled 62 observation wells, and they completed 4 test holes for a total of 66 wells or holes drilled. Our present system continues to expand. We have over 550 real-time groundwater monitoring sites, 80 real-time surface water sites. Additionally, we continue to cooperate with the USGS on our gauging program, and the present system is also expanding to include precipitation and soil moisture real-time sites. This again just sort of repeats some of the other information already presented, but in some of these sites then we're able to collect water level, precipitation, soil moisture, soil temperature, barometric pressure, and air temperature. So in 2024 then, with this system, we collected over 28 million data points. This gives you a map of our observation wells that we measured, and then also the real-time monitoring sites. Those are the yellow ones, and then the red ones are the surface water sites where we have stage being collected. And a lot of these are seasonal ones that are installed in the springtime of the year and then taken out in the fall of the year. And then Andrea showed this slide yesterday. This is just showing the areas where there's potential for future development. This is largely focused towards large economic development projects. This was something that Commerce had requested for us to prepare. It shows that when large industry comes in, if possible, we're trying to get them to the Missouri River, because that's our most plentiful supply of water in the state. New also in 2024 was a permit status dashboard, which allows you to check the status of your water permit. So you can type in your permit or application number or search by your name. It's also applicable for construction permits as well. Also in 2024, we were able to get a new rig. This is a top head drive drill rig. This was at the request of the driller, and then it was funded by a one-time legislative funding. So this arrived in fall of 2024 and is expected to be deployed here next field season. And then I was asked to briefly touch on irrigation districts and the creation of irrigation districts. So irrigation districts actually takes up 7 chapters in Title 61 are associated with irrigation districts. So I'm just going to touch briefly on the organization of irrigation districts. So for the organization of an irrigation district, you need at least 80 acres, 5 electors. An elector is a landowner owning more than 5 acres or 5 or more acres. There's some additional information on an elector because it is a defined chapter or a defined term in the chapter. And obviously the primary benefit of the district is to be for irrigation and not drainage. Basically what it involves is it's a petition, so it's a landowner's signatures for the proposed district, and they give a land description of the land to be in the proposed irrigation district. The land does not have to be contiguous. The petitioner has to provide the name, address, and the land owned, and then there needs to be a map or maps provided showing the boundary of the proposed irrigation district. So the maps need to be prepared by a registered professional engineer. They need to show the proposed conveyance systems and other irrigation works, the stream flow if the source is from the stream, storage reservoir locations and capacities. If it's going to be the sources from groundwater, it's going to be where the general location of the wells and pumping rates. And so, and then it also needs to show preliminary design of all the proposed conveyance systems. And then as well as there needs to be a feasibility report for the plan of irrigation, and that is required to include a soil water compatibility of irrigation lands. So once we receive this petition, the Department of Water Resources reviews it. We'll set a time and place for the hearing on the irrigation district, which is published in the paper for 2 consecutive weeks. Prior to this hearing, the department will prepare a summary report. The summary report then is filed with the county and is available for public inspection, and it is submitted at the time of the hearing. At the hearing, the boundaries may be changed. An outcome from the hearing then may be an order establishing the district. If it's more than 20,000 acres, the department divides into 5 or 7 divisions, and then we specify a time and place to hold the election, and also the district boundaries are specified in the order as well. At the time of the election, there's an election held by the electors to approve the establishment. Obviously, if it's established, then they'll hold an election for the directors, and then there is an order filed by the Department of Water Resources declaring the irrigation district organized. That's all I had prepared, so I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Your 3 places you were looking at for aquifer recharge, You just selected those, or there's a need there, or what was your criteria for selecting those 3 spots?
Yep.
And I guess the follow-up question to that is, what do you plan on doing with it once you find out everything you need to know, and how long will that take?
So the RFP is for 1 year. So these 3 were selected because the Spiritwood Warwick and the Wahpeton Buried Valley Aquifer, they were tier 1s as outlined in the report. Elk Valley was identified as well as a very good. The south portion of it was also identified as a top tier area because of the ongoing municipal and rural water use from the system. And additionally, there's a fair amount of pending applications from that. Like I said, there's 48 pending applications from this source as well. So that was an additional reason to select this. So I was trying to, or we were trying to combine, for Elk Valley in a case, looking at managed aquifer recharge, and then also, can we leverage the groundwater flow model being prepared by the contractor to additionally be used for future management and also addressing the pending applications. So Spiritwood Warwick Aquifer, that is an aquifer that's heavily used as well for providing water to what would have been Langdon Rural Water at the time, and then also Devil's Lake and Greater Rural Ramsey. So that's an important aquifer for rural water and municipal needs up in that portion of the state. And the Wahpeton Buried Valley, that's one that was identified where we have seen 40 feet of decline since the 70s. And there's been continued interest in economic development down there that has been potentially hindered by the lack of availability of water. So can MAR then be used to potentially provide additional waters in that area of the state?
More questions?
In the central Dakota aquifer, back probably 20 years ago, Mike Hovey he tracked how much surface water we had in that aquifer. And during the dry years in the 70s and 80s, we had like 65 square miles of water, of surface water in that area. And in 2005, it was up to like 265 square miles of surface water. And we were thinking, okay, we're going to have some substantial recharge here from all those prairie potholes. And it didn't seem to happen. Do you have any idea what restricts that water on top from getting, those are fairly shallow aquifers. These sloughs have been there for 10,000 years, and I don't know if they're sealed off and the water doesn't get down, or why seems to me like we should have seen more recharge.
So in some of the areas in the northern portion of Gator County, and I'm not going to be exact on this, in the areas where we had unconfined aquifers where there was significant unsaturated zone above it, we did see increases. I can't give you an exact answer on that. The secondary question about not seeing significant water level increases in all zones in the aquifer is because there's 2 to 3 layers associated with that central Dakota aquifer. You have an unconfined one, then there's a restrictive layer, and then there's a confined aquifer. So the main source for those confined aquifers is the ability to, say, leak water from the unconfined aquifer to the confined aquifer. And then that creates a head change that then results in infiltration of water essentially through those semi-permeable layers into the confined zone. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Well, it seemed like before we did all the studying, we knew everything, and the more we learn, the less we know.
Yes, I'm getting stupider by the minute. I will, speaking of Central Dakota, we haven't gotten the final results from the AEM information, but they did provide us with some preliminary results, and it was quite interesting to see, because we've had permits where they've applied, or they've had applications been approved, and we had one just recently where the test hole drilling they did there based upon present mapping would have suggested no problem. But the test hole drilling they did, it was fluvial sediments, but it wasn't necessarily the right quality of sediments to produce a good irrigation well. So, and some of the preliminary results we saw from the Central Dakota AEM inversion showed some of these areas where, yes, you have that broad outwash channel that's associated with the Central Dakota aquifer, but there were areas within there, in this outwash channel, where we saw potentially what would be finer grained sediments.
Hey, Andrew, you showed the present system, and you guys are continuing to put in these continuously monitoring. I was kind of curious, how has that changed your, now you're catching the highs and lows of the aquifer instead of that one a month measurement. So how is that changing the way you look at the response of the aquifers? Can you give us some insight into that? And because I know you're going to continue to expand the present system, right?
Yeah, it's been very helpful with analysis. Some examples quickly off the top of my head that I can think of, even if we don't have pumping responses, since we're collecting barometric effects, we can get barometric efficiencies, which can be used as a diagnostic check on what sort of the condition of the aquifer is. So quickly speaking, or in short, an aquifer with a barometric efficiency close to 0 is essentially an unconfined aquifer, suggesting that water's potentially moving in there. One near barometric efficiency near 1 suggests that it's a completely confined, sealed off unit where potentially no water's getting into the system. West Fargo, for example, we have a present system in that. High barometric efficiency. You go to an unconfined system, barometric efficiency is nearly 0. So even in a steady state scenario where we don't have any sort of discharge from wells, for example, we can still get a quick assessment of the condition of that aquifer, for example. 2, with the time series we're getting now, we're able to get better characterizations of aquifer properties, and then also aquifer recovery too as well. So going back to Kidder County, for example, through drawdown analysis in approving one permit, based upon the recovery that we saw in a similar area, we were able to basically determine that it's somewhat hydrologically disconnected from the other permits in the area based upon the recovery, because it wasn't recovering as we would expect under the assumption that it was connected to that area. That's one example. It allows us to also get quick aquifer properties such as transmissivity, storativity that used to only be obtained through, not only, but predominantly obtained through aquifer tests. So then we'd have to go out and conduct an aquifer test, do an analysis on the drawdown and recovery, get a T and an S, potentially boundaries as well. So the amount of data that's coming in has been very beneficial with that regard. And that's also why we created another section, was we have all this data, okay, it needs to be analyzed, but not everybody that we hire is, is a data analyst, right? Or has the time to do it, they've got to respond to their management area. So can we build tools so our staff isn't having to reinvent the wheel for analysis, where the analysis can potentially be prepackaged for them, so they can get the analysis they want done without having to write the code that's necessary for that. So. That would be a hope.
Snowpack study that was being done. I know down in the Oaks area with Scott Corum and Tafiq, can't remember his last name, but did anything ever come of that? That's been a few years now.
Yeah, so that was, it started a couple years ago. We just got some of the reports and final deliverables late this fall. I guess I could forward those on to you if you're interested with them.
But they will help you in modeling, making decisions on water permits?
So one of the major outcomes from that was that they were basically able to demonstrate that the soil moisture sites that we have really are able to capture the recharge coming into systems. So from that point of view, it was of some benefit. So it also pointed to the fact that it heavily relied on the soil moisture sites. So if we don't have the soil moisture measurement sites, then potentially then there was, one could say that there was, it didn't have a broad benefit. But it did show how those soil moisture sites can be leveraged in assessing aquifer recharge.
So it accomplished the goal that was set out.
Any more questions? Okay, help me thank Andrew for his presentation. All right, we're going to break for lunch, but lunch I don't think is ready until 11:45. And so kind of what's going to happen here is we'd like you to come back to this room for the North Dakota Irrigation Association membership meeting. So that's going to start at noon, I believe. The buffet's in the courtyard, and once you've gotten your food, you can make your way back here for the meeting. So that's at noon. So we've got a little bit of a, this is the meeting during the meeting, or kind of like the time where you're going to talk to your colleagues or make some connections. So thank you. So let's be back at noon here.